So I'm recording this episode on the back end of the storms that have been sweeping across Britain for the last few days. And it's meant that I can't use my normal bit of software that I use to do the recording. So I'm having to be creative and experimental. And as you will know, if you ever have listened to the podcast before, everything is an experiment. So things might look a little bit different, they might sound a little bit different, and hopefully that's okay. And just remember that this was the only way really to get an episode published this week, because Wi-Fi has been extremely sporadic for the last week or so. And this is the only way to actually get something recorded and hopefully get it out to you on Sunday as we normally do. So today's episode is called You're Beautiful. Now, just to be clear, that this isn't anything to do with James Blunt or his song of that title, and I'm really, really sorry if it now gives you an earworm, which is what is going through my head, having had that thought myself. But instead, today's offering is really an invitation. And it is an invitation to join me in a delicious, delightful experiment. A delicious, delightful experiment that can also bring a whole series of challenges, but I think it's worth exploring nonetheless. So, a few years ago, I began an experiment. And at the time, I commuted into the city of London, where I used to work. It was almost 2 hours travel each way. So I had lots of opportunity to try lots of different things on the journey as I began an ongoing exploration of how we could make enormous inner shifts through apparently small changes. Obviously using myself as a guinea pig. And there are two of these experiments that have really stuck with me, though there were many others that I played with at the time. One of them I think I've actually talked about here before, and it's not really the focus for today, but it might be useful to share, might be interesting. So I had realised that I always used to sit in the same seat, if possible, on the train when I was commuting. I'd always stand at the same place on the platform. I'd always get into the same carriage. I'd always go to the same set of 4 seats at the same table, and generally speaking sat in the aisle seat facing the direction of travel. And if I wasn't able to do that, it used to really throw me. It used to disrupt my status quo or my equilibrium for the day. And so when I started to notice that, and I was becoming interested in this idea of creating these inner shifts and how small changes can really support us, I began to deliberately disrupt my day. And actually it's the thing that really inspired the chapter in the Heart of Change book called Beautiful Disruption, this idea that we can create disruption in our day in a way that then supports us in managing other changes that we have perhaps happening around us in our life, or other changes that we want to create for ourselves. The other sort of aspect to that as well was not only did I used to get onto a different carriage, sit at a different table, sit at a different seat. I even experimented with not sitting facing forward. I mean, this was like, shock horror, that was possible. But I also found that I started chatting with people on the train, which kind of through one of my dear friends who used to travel with me quite a lot. But, you sit in a different carriage, you see different faces, and sometimes you spark up really lovely conversations. So that felt to me like a real bonus. But the other thing that I would do is I'd walk from the train station to the office taking a different route, or I'd mix up the route. Rather, if I noticed I was getting into a pattern of always going the same way, I'd then mix it up and take a different route. And in London, in the city, in London particularly, there are lots of little back alleys and really interesting cut-throughs and things that I just started to explore and would find different routes through. So that was one of the experiments that really, really served me, I think. It kind of took me out of that comfort zone that I got very, very stuck in, and meant that I just became a little bit softer about disruption. And I saw that it definitely had a knock-on effect for me at work. At the time I was working quite a big, big, what does that mean, job in the city, and it actually helped me with dealing with disruptions that would sort of come at me through the day. So that's one thing. Now, the other experiment that really sat with me, and I don't know where this came from. It feels like it was one of those things that just welled up inside. And one day I just began a different experiment. And it was about looking at strangers. So people on the street, people on the train, people in the cafe where I went to get my coffee, and seeing them, really fully seeing them, not staring, but just seeing them, and mentally saying to myself, saying to that person really, you're beautiful. Regardless of who they were, regardless of how they looked, regardless of how they were dressed, regardless of all of my unconscious and conscious biases. So I would just notice them, see them, and say quietly in my own head, you are beautiful. Now, this was an acknowledgement of the beauty that we all have inside, regardless of who we are. That depth of humanity that we all have, regardless of who we are. And in the process of saying it, it was about really feeling it. That was my experiment. That was my challenge that I laid out to myself, was to really, really feel it. And to feel it, or to tap into that feeling that we have when we look upon our most dearest loved one. And actually maybe even deeper than that, to kind of tap into how we would want others to look upon that person that we love so dearly. And I think this experiment is about getting out of our own way and really sinking into the part of us that feels that deep connection with others. Now, it can be incredibly hard to do. I am not going to lie. This was not easy. And on the streets of London, I would see so many different people, of course. And I went through so many stages, so many phases of awareness, that it became more and more fascinating the more I did it. And of course, this isn't really about the other person. Although the extending that love to them, I think, has an impact on others. It sends out an energetic sort of force, if you like. But really, it's about us. It's about noticing what are the stages that we go through. So initially, I noticed how easy it was to think you're beautiful when the other person met some kind of aesthetic principle, or they seemed really smiley and approachable, and perhaps I saw them interact with another person, and then I could make some kind of value judgment based on that. So I could say, oh, you seem like a good person. I can apply the phrase, you're beautiful, to you. And then I noticed that I was often basing my value judgment on how they met some previously hidden criteria in terms of how similar they seemed to be to me, you know, whether or not they were in the same tribe, if you like, as me. And if yes, then it seemed to be a bit easier for me to apply these words and to mentally say, you're beautiful. And then things started to get a little bit trickier. I noticed that when I felt sorry for someone, or I felt pity for the other person, then often that would sort of create a kind of softening inside, and I could see beneath what I might have observed or dismissed or not liked in that outer self. Though, of course, pity is a really challenging thing because it implies we're somehow better than the other person. So I noticed that too. And then I also noticed how incredibly hard it was when my eye fell upon someone who fitted some other stereotype. So perhaps someone who seemed a little scary, a bit fierce or aggressive. Or someone that I would ordinarily do my best not to see or not to connect with in any way. And that was when the practice became truly deep. So drawing on that well of love that we all hold inside us to truly see the other person in all their humanity, just as in my heart, I would like them to see me. So I shared this practice as part of the last face-to-face retreat that we ran in London just before lockdown. And the invitation to all of the women who joined us there, and I think there were over 20 of us actually. It was a really gorgeous, gorgeous day, all about how we can practice self-care. And I offered up this exercise as a self-care practice, and I'll come on to how we can really deepen it in a moment. But the invitation was to all the women who joined us that as they travelled to the retreat, that they experimented with this practice to observe others. And I think, just to reiterate, really, this isn't about staring at somebody or analysing them or assessing them in any way. It is simply taking that first connection with them, those first seconds or microseconds of awareness of the other person, and just dropping into that feeling, you're beautiful. Tapping in, like I said before, to that deep well of love that we all hold. So actually, if you were one of the women who joined us at that retreat, I would love to know your reflections on how it was to do the exercise at the time, and just to see how it is to try it again today. You know, is there any distinction here, or, you know, was it just like an impossible thing to do, or was it something that really like sparked your curiosity? Like, just anything goes, you know, obviously there's no right or wrong. And really, I think this is about building the habit of noticing our biases and not being driven by them. You know, we all have bias. It's part of how we build connection with others, ironically. It's that tribal quality that we all seek when we're looking for, you're the same as me, we are connected. And it is part of Maslow's belonging. I talked about that in the episode a couple of weeks ago around gossip. The one, have you heard that one? But while, these biases, they originated actually to serve a purpose. They originated to drive that connection. They can be an enormous hindrance in how we connect to others today. And I suppose in a way, these are kind of buzzwords for the time. We can look at this experiment almost like an exercise in diversity, equity, and inclusion. When we can look on everyone we see and notice the core humanity within them and see the raw beauty in that, then I think, we have an opportunity to really see the whole person too. We begin with the love, and then we can step back and see all of who they are. This is a big ask, of course. I did begin this episode by saying, it's a delicious, delightful experiment, but it's not without its challenges. And, I'm not saying that every time I lay my eyes on someone, it is easy to say, you are beautiful. But I think the practice of it really serves us. And actually, if I'm honest, I haven't sort of thought about this exercise for quite a while, but it came up again today, and I just thought this feels like a really lovely thing to share, and a lovely thing for me personally to practice again. So the invitation is to join me in that experiment. And of course, there is someone else that we can turn this loving attention toward. And we can extend it to ourselves. We can look in the mirror and we can notice all our judgments, all our biases, all the stories we carry about how people should or shouldn't look. And we can put all of those things gently to one side, and we can just see ourselves in our humanity and say, you are beautiful. And if you're interested in exploring this kind of mirror work, then see the episode that I shared in season 1. I think it was around about episode 11, something like that. It's called Mirror Mirror, and if you go onto my website, you can search for it. Just put mirror into the search term, or you can see the link in the show notes as well. I'll put a link in there. But that episode in particular is all about how we can develop our connection with ourselves through a series of practices that we can experiment with. So that's it for today. And as ever, I would really love to hear where this takes your thoughts. Please do follow the podcast if you're listening, or subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. And also join the mailing list as well if you're not yet on there. Just go to hennyflynn.co.uk and you'll get the episodes straight to your inbox every Sunday. And if you're curious about how it would be to actually work together, if there's something that you're looking to shift, create your own inner shifts, or if there's something that you're looking to change, or there's a change happening around you that you want to manage in a slightly different way perhaps, and you're curious about how it would be to work with me to do that, then let's have a chat. And And again, I'll put a link into the show notes, so you can just book something straight into my diary, and we can just have a virtual coffee and just see how that would be. So really just gorgeous to be here. Let's hope all of this different tech has served its purpose today, and I send you a hug and a wave.